I think we're ready to get going. Hopefully we have all of our sites getting video teleconferenced in. And so I'm David Eaton. I'm one of the nurse practitioners at Seattle Children's Autism Center. And tonight I am functioning in the role of executive producer of this faux newscast. So I have, that's a loose term by the way, executive producer. But I have my attire here. And I'd like to introduce for our newscast this evening that we're doing for Autism 101. We have Jim Mancini and Raphael Bernier.
Either way is fine.
The anglicized version. And we'll get going here.
So just make a comment about the question.
Oh yes, thank you. And since we're doing this kind of faux newscast, we'll save all the questions until the very end when the newscast is officially complete.
Okay. Well, good evening.
Oh, whoa. Gotta do the
cut.
That part's not working. Where's the NBC intro?
Oh, let's see.
It's thinking, Rafe. Should we skip that part?
Yeah, let's
sure.
That was the
PowerPoint.
dun.
Good evening, and welcome to our annual State of Autism in 2015 program. I'm Jim Mancini,
And I'm Raphael Bernier.
and we're here to cover the hot topics in the world of autism from the past year, both in the area of research and news on the community, state, and national levels.
We begin tonight with some exciting news from the science field. Turns out that scientists have found what parents have been telling them all along is in fact true. More specifically, this past year there was an important study that came out focusing on gastrointestinal disorders and autism. And what the study did, the scientists examined all the studies that have been conducted focusing on autism and gastrointestinal disorders for the past 8 or so years, and which is a total of 15 studies. And what they found, quite unsurprisingly to many families, was that in fact children with autism tend to have greater rates of gastrointestinal disorders than typically developing children. Now this whole area of interest first started, well, many years ago when parents were telling clinicians and scientists, my child with autism has struggles with constipation, diarrhea, other gastrointestinal problems. And it took a long time for the scientific field and the clinical field to catch on. But due to really largely in part of parent advocacy organizations and parent advocacy, there was a turn towards focusing more on gastrointestinal disorders and autism. So over the years there have been several studies, and last year this study that particularly came out highlighted that in fact children with autism have a likelihood about 4 times greater than a typically developing child for having a gastrointestinal disorder. But what's important to note is that this is not true for all children with autism. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on our show today. But one of the other pieces that came out recently focused on gastrointestinal disorders and autism was that in a mouse model for autism, and we sort of use the term mouse model loosely, but in a mouse model for autism, what scientists were able to do was to administer a series of doses of probiotics to these mice, and what that did is that ameliorated many of the mouse autism symptoms. So really suggesting that there might be some approaches that could be helpful for treating and managing gastrointestinal disorders and ASD-like symptoms for children. We're still years away from that. This is a commentary from the newscaster. We're still many years away from that, but the science suggests that this might be an appropriate approach for some individuals with autism. And over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Ray. So on many people's minds this year was insurance coverage for ABA, for applied behavioral analysis and neurodevelopmental therapies such as speech and OT. To get an update on the current state of ABA coverage, I had a chance to speak to Arzu Farrow and Mira Posner from the Washington Autism Alliance and Advocacy.
Washington Autism Alliance and Advocacy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we're discussing what's happened in the past year, 2014, and I look forward to what's happening in 2015. So, in your opinion, what do you feel like were the biggest advances made this past year?
I'll take that one. Really the big change in 2014 was that all plans that are issued and delivered in Washington State now have to cover ABA and neurodevelopmental services and medically necessary to treat mental health conditions such as autism. We've always maintained that those services should be covered under the state mental health parity laws. And this year, the Supreme Court agreed with us and ruled that a insurance company's blanket exclusion of neurodevelopmental therapies was a violation of the mental health parity laws and void and unenforceable. And then following that ruling, the state insurance commissioner issued a directive to the insurance companies to look at their policies and change them to become compliant with the laws, and also to inform their consumers that they would reevaluate previous claims that had been denied. So this is exciting. We're seeing that some plans have not made these changes yet, and so if families are facing those issues, they should contact us and we can help them with this.
Great. So I think there was some confusion about some of the terms. So what exactly does state regulated mean?
So these are plans that are subject to the Washington state laws, and that includes fully funded group plans that are issued and delivered in Washington state. It also includes individual plans, plans offered on the exchange, and Washington state public employee plans.
And what's the difference between the fully funded plans and self-funded plans that you talked about?
The main difference is who pays the benefits. And so with a fully funded plan, that means the insurance company is responsible for paying the benefits. The self-funded plan, the self refers to the employer. And so this is generally larger employers, and they actually pay the benefits as needed. And but one big difference is that the self-funded plans are regulated by federal laws. So it's very important to know what kind of plan you have so you know what your rights are under the plan. And I like to advise families that if they can't tell just from the face of it, because sometimes it's hard to tell because the employers contract with an insurance company to administer the plan, it looks the same as a fully funded plan. Their human resources department should be able to answer the question, but if they're having any trouble, they can contact us for help with that question.
Okay. And why is it that some of these self-funded plans seem like it's more difficult to get that ADA coverage?
Well, one of the reasons is we're looking at the federal law rather than the state law. So the progress we've made in our state doesn't really help with the self-funded plans in the same way. And each of these plans are, because they're set up by the employers, they're sort of individual in that sense. So you sort of have to take them on one by one. However, we maintain that these plans, because they're subject to federal laws, there's a federal Mental Health Parity Act that applies, and so these blanket exclusions and limits are are invalid under the federal law, and we again will help families navigate that process.
Okay, that helps explain things a little bit. And I know that there's been work done on accessing ADA services in the school system. Could one of you talk a little bit more about that?
I can speak to that. There are a lot of students throughout Washington State whose manifestation of disability and maybe experience their developmental disability and their developmental needs are such that IEP teams determine that applied behavior analysis should be a part of their education program. Right now, for those programs, when ABA is being utilized, when CBAs are contracted by schools or they're employed by schools, unfortunately, school districts don't have a way of seeking reimbursement for those services. The reason for that is applied behavior analysis is listed as a specific exclusion as a non-covered school-based service.
Okay.
We would like to see school districts be able to do that in the same way that they're able to improve services like speech therapy, occupational therapy, counseling. And so we're bringing interested parties to the table to see how we can address this extension.
Okay, that would be great if we could get to do that.
It would be because we know that there's a number of school districts that are contracted with behavior technicians that are part of the education program. So it would be really helpful for districts to be able to
And for our looking forward, what do you foresee in 2015? What are your wishes, or what's on the horizon?
Well, we hope to see more self-funded employers add autism choice benefits voluntarily. There's been a number of large employers just recently who've done that. King County is an example. The city of Seattle has added benefits voluntarily. March of last year out of the volunteer. So we'd like to see more large employers do this kind of so that we don't have to continue with this kind of process that it took for the state of Washington to enforce this. We'd like to see that
And how do you have any suggestions for families about how they might advocate for that in their companies?
We do. We've been working with families who've been working with their employers.
Yeah.
I think Mary can speak to that. There's families who've been tenacious about really. I wish to probably to go to you too.
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes I'm not sure the employers are even that aware of what's in their policy, and so when an employee brings it up with their employer, sometimes it could just be a conversation with the right person. They can really have a great effect that way, and we'd like to see that happen more often. So
Sure. And when they start the conversation, then we can present a case statement for why this is helpful for productivity, why it's really essential for an employer to have this as part of their benefits package. We have that already, and we've been helping families utilize those. So we're happy to share those resources with anyone who
That's terrific. This is really helpful information. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
thank you so much.
All right.
Okay, so the take-home message is that more and more insurances are covering ABA and neurodevelopmental therapies. What you can do, importantly, if insurance denies, request the denial in writing and request all documents that were used to make the coverage determination, and then contact WAAA. Some insurances only allow one level of appeal, so it's important to get that appeal done correctly the first time. To get more information, contact WAAA, the healthcare authority, and your insurance provider. Rafe?
Excellent.
Everything okay?
Everything's great,
Good?
thanks. 2014 was a huge year in terms of advances in understanding the causes of autism. Major findings in the field of genetics revealed key autism genes. The first study we'll talk about was a collaborative study conducted by 3 teams around the country, University of Washington, at Yale University, and at Cold Spring Harbor. And what this team did, group of investigators did, was they completed a full exome study of 2,800 families with autism. So just to take a step back to our sophomore year in biology, high school biology that is, we can all think back to that time when your teacher was covered in chalk and maybe spitting on you because you sat in the front row because you had to, even though you didn't. That was projection. Excuse me. Exome sequencing. If you think back to high school biology, remember, I think of the exons are those gene coding regions of our genome. These are the parts of our DNA that create proteins, which form the building blocks of our whole bodies. So what these investigators did was they fully sequenced all the exons, the whole exome of these 2,800 individuals with autism, as well as moms, dads, and a sibling. So it's a total of over 10,000 individuals for their full exome was sequenced. And what the researchers found, if we move on to our next slide, is that they identified several key genes that seem to be playing a key contributory role to autism. In estimate, there's somewhere between 800 and 1,000 different genes that are likely playing a role in autism. And when we talk about autism, we might be better using the term autisms. A couple key points about that was that many of these genes that we identified are unique. That is, it's hard to find recurrence for many of these genes. You need large numbers, even larger than the over 10,000 individuals studied in this sample. So that was the first major finding in terms of genetics in autism. And the second major finding revealed a key new molecularly defined or genetically defined subtype of autism. And this second finding was a major breakthrough identified by the Simons Foundation and Autism Speaks, reporting it as a key top 10 finding of the year. And we had a chance to speak to the lead author of this study over at the University of Washington.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Bernier, for being here today. My pleasure. Happy to be here. We understand you've been involved in a major breakthrough this past year in helping us advance our understanding of the causes of autism. Tell us a little about that study. Well, this study actually started several years ago, based on a collaboration between me and a number of colleagues here at the University of Washington, where we identified a number of genes that seem to be playing a likely causal role in the development of autism for many children. And so we identified one particular gene in an event called the CHG8 gene. And just so happened, we identified this gene event in a large number of individuals, 3,000 families of autism that we searched for this particular gene. And in 8 of these individuals, we found that this gene wasn't doing what it was supposed to be doing. It was not creating the protein that it was supposed to create. And so it just so turned out that 2 of the 8 people that we identified around the country that had this particular CHG event happened to live here in Washington State. So I got on the phone and called them up and said, hey, we've identified something that seems to be a little different in your child's DNA, and we'd love to see if we could talk to you a little more about it. Sure enough, families came right in, and the first thing they walked through the door, they had a 12-year-old girl who had autism. And when I sat down and met with her, she met clear diagnostic criteria for autism. She had some particular facial features that I identified. She had kind of a macrocephaly. She had a large head, wide set eyes, we call hypertelorism. She had downward slanted palpebral fissures, which meant her kind of eyes slanted downward slightly. She had a prominent forehead, pointed chin. These are findings that didn't necessarily jump out at me, but I made note of them. And in interacting with her, it was clear that she had autism. She had met criteria for intellectual disability as well. And in talking with her parents, it was clear that she had significant gastrointestinal challenges, predominantly constipation. And this is something we see often in autism, but I made notes. I wasn't necessarily going to write home about that. And I also talked with parents, and it sounded like she had significant sleep problems, such that she struggled to sleep even for periods of days. She would not sleep. So again, sleep problems are relatively common in autism, so I made note, but it wasn't that it was jumping out at me. So it turned out that the second family that we identified with the same particular genetic event came in the following week. And this was an 8-year-old boy, and when he came through the door, the first thing I noticed was, he could be a sibling for this young woman I just met last week. In terms of, he had macrocephaly, he had a prominent forehead, the wide set eyes, and I thought, interesting. Sat down, worked with him. Met clear diagnostic criteria for autism. He did not have intellectual disability, which I think is important and relevant. In a meeting with his mom and dad, he had clear gastrointestinal challenges as well as significant sleep problems. Again, so 2 out of 2 for both these. I'm not necessarily going to write home about it, but I'm going to take notes. So go. I ended up working with 15 individuals from around the world with the same particular event, and where this particular gene wasn't creating the protein it was supposed to. It wasn't working the way we anticipated it to work. And sure enough, the vast majority of these individuals had significant gastrointestinal difficulties, had sleep problems, all had autism. About half of those individuals had intellectual disability, which speaks to the notion that this particular genetic event is not necessarily creating a general impact on brain development overall, but really is specifically targeting autism. That is how our brains process the social world. One other quick important note was that when we looked at thousands and thousands and thousands of others, over close to 10,000 other individuals, we've never found anyone who did not have autism who has the same particular genetic event. So in any typical individuals, we've never found the same sort of event. And so I understand part of the study involves fish. That's a fair point. Yes, that's true. So one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure and really understand, well, then what is this gene doing, and is it, can we really attribute what we're seeing in our children? Can we attribute those same sort of, the same observable effects we're seeing, the phenotype we call it, can we really tie that to the genotype of this particular genetic event? So we can do that much more easily with fish than we could do with people. So what we did is we worked with a collaborator at Duke University and his team, and we developed fish models where these fish had the same type of genetic event as our youngsters that we worked with. And first of all, we would generate a number of these fish, grow these fish would develop, and it turns out these fish all had very large heads. And it's funny, when you look at a picture of them, sure enough, it looks like their eyes are kind of wide with these large heads. But that's not all we did. What Nico Katsanis, the investigator at Duke, did, he said, you know what, we can actually look at gastrointestinal system in fish much more easily. So we fed all these little young fish these little fluorescent pellets. And he tracked how long it took for these little fluorescent pellets to pass through their gastrointestinal tract. And it turns out that these little fish with the CH8 events, well, they don't poo. So they're not passing information through their gastrointestinal system, which allowed us to be really confident that what we're seeing, the impact of the CH8 event, that we can believe it, that it's actually the cause or phenotype that we're seeing. Now, what we haven't been able to do is look at an autism phenotype yet in fish. That's for future work, I suppose.
Really, the most important question, I think, for our viewers is, what does this mean for families?
And that's really the important question for all this research. What does this mean for families? Where is this going? Well, there's, I think, two things I would think about to answer that. The first is, I think, what the study helps the scientific field do is start to realize that when we're talking about autism, when it's defined as a behavioral disorder, that is a disorder which meets this behavioral criteria, that behavioral criteria, it first starts to say it, we might actually be moving the science faster if we start by looking at the etiology. So we've identified a number of now genes that we believe are playing a causal role in autism. We've identified close to 200 that we're very confident of. Our estimates that we're looking at really closer to 800 total genes. But what really makes some sense is we can really start to think if we focus in on particular genetic events and understand what the outward expression of that particular genetic event is, that can help us understand and inform the pathway for how a particular individual might develop autism. And then importantly, this is where the family piece comes in, is this then helps us figure out how we can target treatments that are specific to a given child. Right now we have treatments that broadly work for many kids with autism, but we don't exactly know which kiddo should get which type of treatment. And by studying and understanding and defining a group of individuals based on etiology, we can now target treatments that are specific to that particular child. And I think that's the first important step. That's kind of the long-term step, but that's kind of the big meat of it. There's some other factors as well. As we learn more about individuals with particular genetic events, like CHJ, we've now done the same sort of approach with many other particular genetically defined subtypes. But that helps us start to understand what parents can start to expect. Being able to create communities for many families who have a particular similar genetic event, and they can get together and talk and say, hey, you know, Joey does this, and this is what's really helpful for Joey, because now we're helping families get together who have the same particular genetic etiology for their child's autism.
This really does sound like a really a banner year for advancing our understanding of the causes of autism.
Well, it was a big year for sure. We've still got lots more to do, and that's for sure.
Thanks very much for being here with us this evening, Dr. Bernier.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
We had, you know, Jim, I could listen to that guy talk all day long.
Oh yeah, he's amazing. Another development in Washington last year was the creation of the Center of Excellence system. To explain the background of why this system was developed and how it changed service delivery in Washington State, I spoke to Dr. Chuck Cowan, Medical Director of the Seattle Children's Autism Center.
Hello, we're here with Dr. Chuck Cowan, Medical Director of the Seattle Children's Autism Center, and we're going to be discussing the Centers of Excellence system. Thanks for joining us, Chuck.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jim.
Could you explain the creation and development of the Center of Excellence system?
So the Center of Excellence is really, I think, one of the most important things that's happened in the last year or so in terms of providing access to services throughout the state of Washington for children with autism spectrum disorders. So to give you a little quick background, a number of years ago, various insurance companies in the state of Washington were sued by public interest lawyers regarding the issue of access to applied behavioral analysis or ABA services. Prior to these lawsuits, most insurance companies, including the state insurance, Medicaid, did not cover ABA services. The outcome of those lawsuits was that the courts mandated that Medicaid and other insurance companies must provide ABA services based on a number of important legal issues. So when the healthcare authority, which is the organization in the state that runs the Medicaid system, tried to figure out how they're going to approach providing ABA services, they needed to be assured that, first of all, that ABA services were warranted, that they were being prescribed appropriately, and that the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders, which is the key diagnosis that would mandate or potentially mandate ABA services, was being done professionally throughout the state. So when HCA looked around the state, they recognized that there were some places in the state that had experts, but for the most part, these were places predominantly in big cities. Most of them in Seattle, like Tacoma, some in Yakima, and some in Spokane, which left large portions of the state that did not have adequate diagnostic and prescriptive services available. So the various folks at the state, particularly a very important person, Gail Krieger, who is the nurse manager of Medicaid, approached Seattle Children's to help them try to figure out how to increase the network of providers. And we've been involved in training in a number of places, most recently in Wenatchee, training coming up in Spokane, and Longview. And there's still areas in the state that people have to drive great distances because there aren't services available. But we have certainly expanded the number of available places for diagnosis and prescription writing for ABA services. There's still a lot of the state that is uncovered. The term Center of Excellence was one that was created by HCA, and it can be a little confusing. Basically, the role of the Centers of Excellence are to make a diagnosis and to write a prescription for ABA services based on a variety of guidelines involved in that. And their role does not include providing services on site, and the various kinds of provider groups have taken on this task. Some individual providers, some bigger organizations that have multidisciplinary approaches. So the system is still very much in evolution, and its expertise is evolving.
Okay. So it sounds like the access has improved as a result of the system to some degree. Are there other things that have have happened to improve the service delivery in our state?
Well, the COE's job is really a fairly limited one. It doesn't involve actual provision of ABA services, and this is still one of the big areas that our state does not have adequate services yet. It should be mentioned that other states in the United States have had mandated ABA services from insurance companies for many years. Those have been accomplished through legislative effort, but that did not happen in Washington. And those states that have already had insurance coverage for ABA have a lot more providers. So unfortunately, we're still very far behind. When a family gets a prescription from a Center for Excellence for ABA, they then have to unfortunately get on some waiting list to find ABA providers who are not distributed evenly throughout the state. Certainly rural areas have more challenges. Families have to drive quite a bit. But it's definitely been a huge improvement compared to before the COEs were involved.
Right. So what do you foresee happening in this year, 2015?
Crystal ball. Foreseeing the future is always challenging. I think I would rather put it in terms of my wish list.
Okay.
I think that we have the beginning of a potential statewide network of autism providers. Right now, the centers of excellence are not really networked with each other. They don't really talk to each other. They don't have conferences. So if I had my wish, I would find some way to have a network process that allowed everyone in the state to learn from each other. And then there's certainly big areas of the state, in rural parts of the state, that don't have any centers of excellence yet. So we're still hoping that there will be a continued expansion. Recently, we were contacted by an organization in the Rainier Valley in Seattle, which is an area of a lot of different ethnicities, and they're hoping to become a COE. So that's a small group of providers that have said they're willing to take on this role, and we're going to help them become a center for excellence. So I guess I would hope that we would continue to build this system, to network it, use it for training. I have a colleague in Portland and folks in Oregon who are the same thing, looking at trying to get our two states together to work on improving understanding.
Right, that sounds like a great wish list. So, well, thank you very much for taking your time.
My pleasure, Jim. Thanks.
All right.
So, just to review, families with Medicaid need to get an ABA letter from a Center of Excellence prior to initiating services. To locate a Center of Excellence, you can go to the website for the Healthcare Authority, which looks like this. And there are many centers of excellence throughout the region. And one of the goals is for families to receive services closer to home, so expect an expansion of centers of excellence across the state. And now to move back to research.
Excellent. Too many synapses. That's what one high-profile study reported this past year. Too many synapses for individuals or in the brains of individuals with autism. So a group of researchers studied the brains of children and adults with autism who had passed away, and they gathered up the brains and actually studied the number of synapses. That is, these are the connections between neurons, the brain cells. And it turns out in this sample of 26 individuals who had passed away, they identified that there's an overabundance of these synaptic connections where these neurons are connecting. Now, early on in development, in typical development, we see a large overgrowth, a proliferation of our vice producer is commenting on our sound systems here. Early in development, in typical development, we see an overproduction of synaptic connections, right? As neurons are developing, as our brains are developing, we want to increase the number of connections. And over time, through experience, then many of those connections are pruned away appropriately so that we can make our brains essentially more efficient. And so what the study was suggesting that in individuals with autism, that typical process of pruning wasn't happening. So what these researchers did was take that information then to a mouse model for autism. And they used a particular medication to see if they could restore that appropriate pruning function. So they used rapamycin in this, again, a mouse model for autism. And they found that in these mice, even when these mice had reached adulthood, that they could actually restore the appropriate normal pruning process and reduce the number of synapses, and importantly, ameliorate those autism symptoms in these mice. And I've sort of used that sort of autism symptoms. There's a number of proxies that are used for mice models for autism and behaviors that can be looked at in terms of some repetitive behaviors or the way these mice interact with other mice. It's not great, it's not perfect, but it's a start. So exciting research in terms of the potential medications that could mitigate some of the atypicalities in brain development in autism this past year. Over to you, Jim.
All right. So moving into the area of education, all eyes this year have been focused on the McCleary decision, which dates back to 2007 and was initiated by a group that included parents, the state's largest teachers union, school districts, and educational advocates. And in January of 2012, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the state of Washington is violating the constitutional rights of children by failing to live up to its paramount duty to amply fund the education of K through 12 students. The court ordered the legislature to make steady, real, and measurable progress each year and fully fund K through 12 education by the year 2018. Which would include transportation, materials, full-time kindergarten, and class size reduction. These requirements include all children, which includes children with disabilities who are considered basic education students first based on a prior Supreme Court ruling. In September of last year, the state Supreme Court ruled that the legislature was in contempt for failing to obey that court order. Some state legislators have stated it is a priority to fund McCleary in 2015. In McCleary, the court also noted simply pouring money into an outmoded system will not succeed. So this idea of the outmoded system has been of note to the federal government as well, who are now looking at outcomes, not just state levels of compliance with laws and regulations. So Washington State in particular has been identified as a state that needs assistance with regard to outcomes for children with disabilities. Measures that are taken into account include how many students with disabilities have math and reading fluency, whether services are provided in separate settings, how many students with disabilities go on to post-secondary education settings, graduation and dropout rates for children with disabilities, whether parents are considered active participants or in the implementation, and the employment rates of persons with disabilities in the state. Data shows that a significant number of students with disabilities 1 year after graduation from high school are largely unemployed and not in any post-secondary training program. So this falls on school districts, and school districts are under a lot of pressure to develop systems that target outcomes. The problem is that neither the feds nor the state are providing guidance to schools to how to develop these systems, just providing a mandate that it needs to be done. So the bottom line here is there is a push to fundamentally change the way that we deliver services to children with disabilities, but no handbook on how it can be accomplished. Another trend in schools this past year included increased focus on social-emotional learning and support for children who have mental health concerns. One development was to propose to fund positions in schools for additional school psychologists, social workers, nurses, and counselors. Several districts in the state received grants from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to provide mental health services in school. In addition, the Disability Rights of Washington is advocating for school-based mental health services for children who have Medicaid. There's also been a recommendation from the governor's office to provide money to train special education director candidates and principals in regards to special education. So what does this mean? What this means is that there is going to be an increased focus on support for children who are quote-unquote vulnerable populations, such as children who have autism and children with mental health issues. It also means there's going to be an increased discussion this year related to how special education services are delivered, and an awareness that it is not simply an issue of funding, but more importantly, a realization that the current service delivery model is not working. 2015 should be an important year as a legislator attempts to fund McCleary, and this will likely take precedent over the initiative to decrease class size that was passed last November. And an increased focus on how to better support populations who cross that line between general and special education, including kids with ISD and kids who have mental health issues. What you can do is send a message to your legislators that improvements to special education is not simply a matter of throwing more money toward the problem, but there needs to be a fundamental change in how we support children with disabilities. In addition, support your educators, because the collaboration between parents and teachers is the best way we can begin to change the system so it better supports our kids.
Marvelous. Back over to science. 2015, the term of the year in terms of science is definitely going to be biomarkers. We know that because National Institutes for Health as well as the Simons Foundation together have pledged to spend more than $30 million over the next 3 to 4 years focusing on biomarkers for autism. So in order to find out a little more about what biomarkers are, we went to speak to Dr. Caitlin Hudak at the University of Washington. We had the opportunity to visit Dr. Caitlin Hudak at the University of Washington's Center on Human Development and Disability. Dr. Hudak is a cognitive neuroscientist who studies, well, the neuroscience of autism. We got a chance to visit her in her EEG and eye tracking lab to find out all about what ASD biomarkers are and why they are important.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hudak, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
We hear the term biomarkers for autism being used. What exactly are scientists talking about?
Biomarkers refer to a specific indication of a disorder like autism. So these indicators are of a biological nature, which means that they can be related to a specific behavior or a specific genetic event or a brain signature of that disorder.
So why is it important for us to focus on biomarkers for autism?
By looking for biomarkers, we really hope to be able to identify signs of autism as early as possible. Since autism is a developmental disorder, we need to intervene as early as possible during development so we can give each child the opportunity to develop and improve their skills and achieve long-term positive outcomes.
Well, so what are some of the potential biomarkers that are out there that scientists are talking about now?
So over the past 5 years, researchers have used a variety of different techniques to look for biomarkers. In one of our functional magnetic resonance imaging studies, led by Dr. Kevin Pelfrey, we discovered that different areas of the brain are actually possible biomarkers of autism. So in that study, we had children viewing videos of human motion and found that children with autism have reduced activation in brain regions such as the superior temporal sulcus and the fusiform gyrus compared to typically developing children. So these brain regions have been targeted for monitoring ongoing success of treatments and other interventions, such as the use of oxytocin to promote social learning. Other recent studies have used eye tracking to discover that early patterns of visual attention are indicative of later autism diagnosis. For instance, a recent study led by Dr. Fred Schick, 6-month-old infants who are then later diagnosed at age 3 with autism, they spend more time looking at the outer edges of a face when they are viewing videos of people talking. And this is problematic for developing social and communication abilities because we really need to utilize information in the inner parts of the face, the eyes and the mouth, for example, to really learn about people.
I had the chance, while visiting, to be a guinea pig at her lab and find out about some of the new technology that's being used when studying biomarkers for autism. We learned about eye tracking and we learned about encephalography.
So here in our lab, we implement eye tracking and electroencephalography, or EEG, together to learn more about how different biomarkers converge on a unique and specific indicator of autism for each child. One of the problems with research in this field is that often studies are limited to children who have higher intellectual ability. And we hope that by integrating multiple technologies, we'll be able to answer questions about cognition and social skills, communication abilities, regardless of that child's level of function. For instance, with nonverbal children or infants, we can use eye tracking measures as a proxy of a behavioral response and then see how that corresponds with the brain response.
Any hints of what we might be seeing in the future regarding biomarkers for autism?
Yes, I'm really glad you asked that question, actually. So in addition to combining brain and behavior measures, we're also using genetic profiles as biomarkers. And we're really excited about some new results that suggest we need to pay attention to how specific genetic events may be related to other specific patterns of brain activation. So we had children come in and they're watching videos of social and non-social motion while they're wearing the EEG net, and we record electroencephalography, or EEG. And what we find is that some of the children who have a likely gene-disrupting mutation, such as DYRK1A, associated with autism, some of these children are exhibiting patterns of brain activation that are more similar to typical development, while other children with mutations such as DS-CAM and CHD8 are exhibiting atypical patterns of activation more similar to that autism biomarker. So as we continue to grow and learn about this research, we are hopeful that we can truly improve early intervention and successful outcomes for these children by identifying genetic biomarkers in conjunction with brain and behavior biomarkers.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure to be here.
Well, it was a real pleasure speaking with Dr. Hudak, and I'm not sure who did the editing on that one, but maybe they need to get fired. Anyway, to you, Jim.
All right. So we're going to move on to the Developmental Disability Administration. We're going to start with a quote from State Representative Jerry Pollitt. Mr. Pollitt says, "The question is how any elected official can hear the agony and pleas from those who help their loved ones with developmental disabilities 24/7 for years without respite care, waiting 7+ years to get services for a child, and then not understand that we must provide support in our budget. No more tolerance for 16,000 people on DDA wait lists. This is why a budget is a moral statement." So currently, we have 14,000 individuals on the DDA caseload who are eligible for services, but who do not receive paid DD services. And these individuals are very similar to the ones who are served. Two major changes coming up in the next couple of years will enable DDA to give 5,000 of these individuals access to services. 4,000 will be slated to get family support respite services, and 1,000 to get services through the Basic Plus waiver. To enable all this to happen, the legislature directed the state to convert family support services into a Medicaid waiver and to create the community first choice option as a new way to offer personal care for everyone. So these changes are quite complicated and will present changes families and individuals need to be aware to make informed choices. So what you should know is that DDA is saying that no one currently receiving DDA services will lose coverage or have their services reduced. DDA recently published several YouTube presentations that are on these changes. They can be found at the Informing Families website. The videos focus on the changes coming to personal care and for family support. So get more information about these DDA changes from the website.
Great. In the realm of intervention, two big studies came out in the year 2014, and we can expect to see very similar types of studies coming out the next year. The first study really wasn't so much about intervention, but rather about prevention. So what Dr. Sally Rogers at the UC Davis Mind Institute did was she provided preliminary evidence that if behaviorally based interventions are begun very early on in development, about 12 months of age, that it might be possible to actually put kiddos on a different developmental trajectory so that they no longer meet or would never actually develop an autism diagnosis. So it's preliminary research, and I'll talk us through the slide here in a moment, but I just want to highlight that it's a pilot study. And there's some challenges to the work that was done, but it's a really promising idea that we can take what we already know is working, behaviorally based interventions, apply them very, very early on, and in the case of her study, this was all parent-implemented behaviorally based interventions, and actually change the developmental course for youngsters. So what her study design was she took a small number of kiddos who were between the 7 and 15 months of age, and they were showing some early signs of autism. And so she approached them and said, hey, we've got a experimental treatment we'd like to try. It's a parent-delivered, behaviorally based intervention. A number of these kiddos agreed to participate. A number of the parents declined. And so they began treatment, and then they followed these kids along with a couple other kids they were following and want to see how things developed over the next 3 years. So with this complicated slide show, I'll kind of talk us through them. On the bottom left, we have on the x-axis there, age in months for these youngsters. On the y-axis, we have a proxy for nonverbal cognitive abilities. It's called a visual reception developmental quotient, with a score of 100 would be an average score. And each of those lines represents a different group, performance for the kids that are in a different group. So the blue line there represents kiddos who received this intervention. In the red line, which we can also see in the bars above, that represents the kiddos that did not or that declined the treatment. And then we have 3 other comparison groups. I will highlight in green and purple. In green, this is a high-risk infant sibling group. That means these are kiddos who have an older brother or sister who has autism. And a low-risk group is infants who have a typically developing older brother or sister. And then there's a final comparison group in yellow here. These are kiddos that had autism that they've been following for a long time from a different study. So it's kind of we'll tack these on sort of a group for this project. So what they found was that the kiddos who were receiving treatment did not differ from the comparison groups at 9 months of age when they were first starting the study. Go. They received this intervention it wasn't a very long intervention. It was just a few months long intervention. And then they tested again these kiddos at 36 months of age. It turns out that the kiddos with receiving intervention had much higher IQ scores, both nonverbal IQ and then verbal IQ. And verbal IQ would be presented here on the slides on the right. So there's some problems with this study, for sure. For example, who knows if these youngsters that were participating in the study were going to go on to develop autism? We don't really know. But they were showing early signs, and we were applying a treatment approach that seems to be very effective for young children who already have autism. So it's really promising in terms of suggesting that maybe we can actually change developmental trajectories early on. Still a lot of work needs to be done, but it got a lot of attention in the media. The second study that got a lot of attention in the media concerned broccoli, specifically a broccoli extract. Maybe it got a little more attention than it needed to in the media, but it got some attention. I want to talk about it for a second here. It was a small study that looked at boys and men, kind of a large age range, kiddos as young as 13 years of age and young men who are 27 years of age. And these individuals participated in a trial that was pretty well designed, a trial where they received a treatment that was based on a broccoli extract. And the reason that the investigators decided to take this approach is that for a number of individuals with autism, symptoms seem to abate somewhat. Parents report that kiddos are a little more responsive, a little more socially engaged when the individual has a fever. And there's some a mechanism believed to be involved that perhaps during a fever, the brain might be functioning a little bit more typically, is the theory for individuals with autism. And it's been reported by parents a lot. Again, I think what's important is that actually science is responding to what parents are saying much more quickly now, given the whole gastrointestinal disorder situation, which took a long time for scientists to listen. At any rate, what this particular broccoli extract does is it mimics that heat shock response that was reported in terms of improved behavior along with a fever. And so they said, great, we're going to apply this treatment. We're going to use this broccoli extract. We're going to try it out. And what was good about the study was that there was random assignment. That is, folks that participated in the study, they flipped a coin. You either got the treatment or you got a placebo. The other thing that was pretty key about it was that that the folks that then did the pre-testing and post-testing were naive as to which individuals were getting the treatment or which kiddos or individuals, their kids and adults, are getting the placebo. So you can really make sure that there's no bias being introduced into the actual study design. So that was great. There were a handful of problems with the study, though, that I want to highlight. First of all, it was a small sample. It's hard to sort of make huge generalizations from that. The second is the vast majority of the participants that participated in the study to begin with, many of those folks, actually 80%, had reported that the parents had reported that their children tended to do better when they're having a fever. They tended to be more socially engaged, more socially responsive, had fewer repetitive behaviors and other atypical behaviors. So already we've got a sample that is not representing all of individuals with autism. Another challenge with the study was that did I actually say, in fact, that the individuals who got the extract actually seemed to do better at the end of the study? It's kind of an important point I should make. So it turns out that the individuals receiving the treatment tend to do better than the individuals who got the placebo, on average. And that sort of highlights another limitation of the study. Not all the individuals actually improved following exposure to the extract. And that speaks again to what we were talking about earlier. When we talk about autism, we're talking about a lot of different disorders. So it makes sense that not all individuals are going to respond to treatments in exactly the same way. But again, it speaks to how generalizable this type of finding is. A couple other limitations. One is that 2 of the individuals who were on the treatment group, who were getting this broccoli extract, ended up having seizures during the course of the treatment. Now, these children had a history of seizures in the past, but it's hard to kind of rule that out, whether they would have had these seizures without that. And lastly, kind of the most troubling limitation for me is that it turns out that the institution at which these scientists work, that institution is poised to receive a significant amount of money in terms of royalties based on the sales of this particular broccoli extract, which just harkens back to things like the Andrew Wakefield situation from 1999 in terms of when there's a conflict of interest in what scientists are doing, it sort of makes you wonder a little about the science. So that being said,
well, it does seem like there's one take-home here, which is this is just just to start and to interpret it cautiously.
Right.
And the second take-home is when mom says to eat your broccoli, you should eat your broccoli.
Eat your broccoli, true. Fair enough. But actually, that does bring one more point, which I'd like just to highlight for one quick moment, is that any of these new treatments that we think about, I really think it's important to think about them in the context of how we might evaluate that intervention. We want to evaluate on 2 different parameters. One is, what do we know about the effectiveness of a given treatment, and what do we know about the safety of a given treatment? So, for example, when we talk about a broccoli extract, well, we don't know much about the effectiveness. There's been one study, it hasn't been replicated. We know there's limitations there, so we're going to put that kind of in the limited or inconclusive evidence section. And in terms of the safety, the things we know as well, a couple of the kiddos ended up with seizures. That's not such a great outcome. We want to sort of question our safety. The other thing is that these broccoli extracts are available out in the community, but we don't know anything about the dosage because it's not monitored. These are kind of supplements. So that sort of then adds sort of questions to how safe it would be to use these sort of interventions. So at this point, given we have limited safety knowledge and limited effectiveness, we're going to stick that in the kind of avoid and discourage category for the most part. But I really think we can use this type of approach for when thinking about any interventions that is out there.
All right, thanks, Ray. So another topic that received a lot of attention this year was is support for adults with autism. So we're happy to have Dr. Gary Stobbe with us tonight. Dr. Stobbe is an adult neurologist and director of the Adult Autism Clinic at the University of Washington and the Transition Program at Seattle Children's Autism Center. Thanks for coming out, Gary.
Thanks, Jim.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, Gary.
Rafe, good to see you guys.
All right.
Forgot to send me the message to wear my jacket.
Yep.
And I thought I was going to have an overstuffed chair, but
who's the producer of this thing?
I guess I'll put up with it, but thank you.
I just assumed adult neurologists always wore that outfit.
It's my after-hours outfit.
Okay. So, well, what are the general thoughts regarding adults with autism in our community?
Well, those of you that don't know me, I'm an adult neurologist by training, and I have been working in clinical services since 1993, so going on 20 years, and I've been lucky to be able to, having also worked with kids, follow individuals into adulthood. And the thing that's been most striking to me has been the progress that continues to occur in young adults with autism. And that was one of the things that really drew me to the field. I think it's a condition that where you do see developmental progress. The concern, though, is that so many of the services end at age 21, especially when school ends. Mm-hmm. And I worry that parents are losing energy and burning out, and just at the time when you're starting to make traction, and when you really all the hard work of early intervention, mm-hmm. Can really start to take hold. And we just really have to keep these families going and keep these individuals going. But So that's the big message that I really like to get across to parents is that, don't stop, and to the individuals as well. Don't stop. Think about, when the kid is 21, a young adult, think back to when they were 11 and all the progress. And I'm impressed by even more progress from that age, the next 10 years. So it's an exciting message to be able to relay to families.
Yeah, so adults are continuing to make progress.
Exactly.
After graduation, after that 21-year-old.
Exactly, absolutely.
So has there been any research that examines trends in the adult population?
There hasn't been a lot of research. We're definitely, we're behind the research that has been shown in early intervention. Probably the best research is currently coming out of a longitudinal study out of the University of Wisconsin. The Weissman Center has been following a group of individuals as they age into adulthood. And that's just starting to reap some good early science. And one of the preliminary findings that was presented at the International Meeting for Autism Research this last year in 2014 did a very interesting analysis of the effects of having a job and being for young adults with autism. They did a dual analysis where they looked at the severity of autism and the impact on having a job, and then they reversed it and looked at the impact of having a job on the severity of autism. And what was interesting was that the severity of autism didn't really influence whether or not an individual had a job, but having a job influenced the severity of autism and improved the features of autism by having a job. And if I think about that, it makes perfect sense. I mean, where do we learn after school ends? Where do we continue our social skill, building our social skills? I mean, Rafe, I'm sure if you were the same as you were when you were 21, I don't know if you'd be able to, survive in our clinic. In fact, I'm impressed to see Rafe even sitting. Usually he's up pantomiming, but I think that we continue to learn. We all continue to learn, and we need to have places to learn. And the concern again is that young adults, when school ends, do not have opportunities to continue to learn, both their functional skills and their social skills. So we're really pushing the idea of having a job, and a job doesn't have to be to make wages. A job, for a lot of individuals with autism is all about having a place to go, having a community, getting up in the morning, going to this place, interacting with people, coming home, having this routine. So you can think of all the different reasons why this is really important. So this is exciting proof of what really makes sense to all of us.
Great. So have there been developments locally to help better serve the adult population?
Well, shameless plug opportunity. We have a branch of the Children's Autism Center that we opened up this last year up in Bothell called the Alyssa Burnett Adult Life Center. And this was isn't really a response, again, I think the point Rafe making about listening to parents, and about hearing this need for opportunities, for young adults to continue to learn, to continue this process of lifelong learning. And so we were excited to open up this program up in Bothell. It's intended for adults with autism as well as other related disorders. And the focus is on continuing to learn social skills, opportunities for recreation, opportunities to learn pre-vocational skills, and to get together and have a place to go and to feel as part of theirs. And we're running the program much like would be run in a Parks and Recreation program, where we offer classes. And the classes rotate on a quarterly system, just like the University of Washington quarter system. And I think that in the first year we served over 80 adults. The program is rapidly growing. And what we have to do is we have to prove that we can do this in a fiscally responsible manner, so that we can offer the opportunity to replicate this in other communities and really develop the playbook so that other organizations can take this model and take it out into other communities. So this is a very exciting development this year.
Terrific. So what's next? What do we look forward to for 2015?
Well, 2015 and beyond.
And beyond,
You know, I
right.
think I feel like we're seeing some interesting things develop. I feel like we're at again one of those times where the stars may be aligning, where we can see real change in our community. But I think that it's something, you know, the individuals make progress. Individuals with autism make progress, but they have to have opportunity. They have to have opportunities to learn. They have to have jobs, and they have to have a community that is welcoming to them. And I think we have to see change not just in the individuals, but we have a responsibility to change our community. And we have to get rid of the ability for people to continue to be prejudiced against individuals with disabilities. And it's our responsibility in our everyday life to educate our neighbors, our friends, so that the community can be more welcoming to our young adults with autism spectrum disorder and other developmental disabilities. So that's my call to action. You know, I think we all have a responsibility if we're going to see this occur.
All right, a call to action. Great, Gary, thanks.
Great. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Gary.
Good work.
Okay. Okay, so our final story focuses on autism in the media and the ongoing discussion related to how people with autism fit into society. In late 2013, a statement from Autism Speaks prior to a national summit in Washington, D.C. led to the resignation of John Elder Robison, author of the memoir Look Me in the Eye and autism advocate, and a general uproar from other autism advocates and parents alike. The controversy lasted throughout 2014 with articles and blogs from autism self-advocates criticizing labeling autism a disease that needs to be healed. Robison said, "I celebrate the gifts autism brings us, and I have discussed at length the emerging realization that autism, as a neurological difference, confers both gift and disability on everyone it touches. It's the fire that moves humanity forward while simultaneously being a fire that can burn us individuals as we try to make our way." Many autistic people are aware of this dichotomy. Some of us feel totally disabled, and others feel totally gifted. Most of us, I'd venture to say, feel both ways at different times, depending on what we're doing at that particular moment. Consequently, I support the idea of changing society to make it more accommodating for people who are different.
In advertising both nationally and locally, including this advertisement, hit on this point. And I think what's important about this, and one of the sort of the good that came from this, is that at least allowed us to have a dialogue and start discussing about the differing points of view that folks have about what autism is.
Great. And in regards to the identity versus disability debate, there's likely no correct answer or perspective. To some, autism is their identity. For others, it is a significant disability. To most, as Robison would say, it is both. Given the wide spectrum that is autism, we are going to see a wide variety of perspectives, a great number of individual voices. In November of last year, we hosted a panel of extraordinary young people who represented some of these voices. So first, we're going to have Alex and Ben.
We weren't going to go to this place, but I'm gonna take us there, and that's that question of a disability. Do you think that you have a disability, any of you? That's a hard question also.
What is a disability?
I don't know.
How would one define a disability?
I don't know. I think it's really hard to say. But that word floats around a lot in association with the word autism.
Who gets to define disability?
Yeah.
The ADA. I'm just kidding. Well played. No, but seriously, it is really hard to define what's a disability. I mean, there's so many different models of disability. I mean, you go to a doctor. I mean, we're talking about autism and, you know, stuff like that, it's probably going to be a psychiatrist. But they tend to use the medical model. They tend to look at what is it about your child that is wrong? What do we need to fix? You know, and after you know, going to therapists and being told, you know, you need to do this to fit in because you're doing this wrong and you're broken in this sort of way, this and that, and you're affected, you know, and all, you know, it just starts like bashing on your self-esteem and stuff. I prefer to look at autism through the social model of disability, which kind of says that in part, or I guess for the most part, we're disabled because society doesn't accommodate us.
So that was Alex and Ben who challenged our idea of disability. Tammy Mitchell, director of the Alyssa Burnett Center, wrote an elegant post on the autism blog that included insights following that panel, so that would be worthwhile taking a look at. And next up is Timmy, who is nonverbal and communicates using an iPad.
This is addressed to an autistic child, if Tim had something to say to an autistic child. So, here.
Learn to talk. This is too slow to be part of society.
We also received feedback from some that felt their voice or the voice of their child was not represented on that panel due to extremely challenging behavior that prevented participation. Holly Tabor, a bioethicist here at Seattle Children's and a mother of a child with autism, says, "It is important to recognize what our own perspective is and be aware of it, but it is just as important and harder to put ourselves in the position of the voices less familiar to us or to our personal experience." So finally, there were headlines throughout the year of cases of abuse, including locking children in cages and several incidents of parents murdering or attempting to murder their children. Critics felt that in many of these cases, the message from media reports was not, "It is horrible that this child was abused or killed," but instead, "Look how hard it is to have a child with autism." This leads to a demonization of autism that in the end is dehumanizing for the child without recognizing the lack of help for the parent.
So I think what's important about these reports is that it does highlight that for caring for children with autism for some families can be a significant burden. And so that being said, we know it's significant. We know it can be challenging for some individuals. And so there's lots of things we can do. Of course, in an emergency, we can go to 911. There's a number of resources that are in the community that are available for calls if folks are feeling like, wow, this is beyond my capabilities, I can't handle it, feeling suicidal. There's the 1-800-273-TALK line. The most common sort of feedback we hear from other parents is, you know, call another family member, call a friend, call someone out there just to get on the phone and just chat. A number of support groups, and there's other solutions like contacting DDA for getting at that respite. Because, again, there's a continuum, but it can be challenging, and some of these can result in crises.
Yeah, and ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the bottom line here. So it's clear that from many of the reports that we've heard tonight that our society is not suited to support and accept people with autism, and there is a lack of vital services for families who are in crisis. So our question for 2015, what do we need to do to change society? So we have some acknowledgments that a couple of people would like to point out. David Eaton has been great up here in the front. Katrina Davis, who will wave her hand up, is instrumental. Melania and Frank up in the booth. And Anna Gomez is over here. She gets you, if you were in any of the teleconferencing sites, Anna's the one that sends you all those emails. So we're going to open up for questions, and there's some individuals, some experts in the room that if the question is pertinent to you, I hope that you'd be willing to answer that question. So that's it.
Thank you.
And if you can wait until the microphone, that will help with people who are at the teleconferencing site. So yeah, we'll go with this one up here.
You're saying autism is in animals, fish, and mice?
Good, fair question, good question. So it's hard to say if autism is in other species because we don't really know. But what has been done in the research world is to answer some of the more molecular questions, things that we can't answer in people because, well, we can actually generate other animals and open up brains and do those sorts of things that we can't do with people, of course. So there's been a number of models that have been generated or created. So for example, one of the common mice models is to have a dam, they're called, the mom. I'm not an animal guy, but sort of they take the mouse mom and inject the mouse mom with valproic acid, valproate or Depakote. It's an anti-seizure medication that's been used. That's actually been discontinued now because we know it increases rates of autism in humans. So by injecting valproic acid into little mouse moms, then these baby mice end up developing atypical social behaviors and a number of repetitive behaviors, repetitive grooming behaviors. And that becomes sort of a mouse model for autism. There's also been a number of mouse models that have been based on the genetic findings that we've had. So we know that particular genes we know are going to be disruptive in autism, disruptive leading to autism. And so by generating animals based on those genetic genotypes, then we can say, well, it's a mouse model or it's a fish model. But we don't really know because, what does it look like if a fish has autism? We don't really know. But it's a great question.
Great. Let's take a break from the audience in here and just see if there's anybody at any of the video teleconferencing sites that have a question for us. Any of the sites across the region? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right.
What kind of treatment are you guys using for the gastrointestinal problems for the children who are having those?
That's a great question. So I can tell you what's been done in the literature, and we could actually pull from some of the providers here in terms of what folks are using. My sort of personal experience is a nice referral to the gastroenterology team here at Seattle Children's Hospital is always a good resource. But from the literature side of things, there haven't been any good empirically studied treatments for gastrointestinal symptoms in autism to address autism. There's going to be a whole bunch of treatments that are out there to address gastrointestinal issues. But there's a field of research that's suggesting by treating and addressing gastrointestinal symptoms, we might modify or change autism symptoms. The literature still, there's no literature to support that yet, but that's kind of where the scientific community is going, trying to explore that and understand that better. I'm not sure actually if there's any sort of suggestions about what folks are using. I don't know, David, what do you think in terms of?
Like you said, we don't have any evidence that we use to really treat autism symptoms per se, but you just treat the gastrointestinal symptoms. There has been, though, some recent push, particularly from Autism Speaks, to do a lot of research into gastrointestinal disorders because it is certainly much more common in kids with autism versus kids in the general population. So there's something out there, but there's not evidence, for example, gluten-free, casein-free, that's still lacking kind of solid evidence that we can recommend that as an autism therapy, but we can certainly be looking at those things if somebody has other, not autism symptoms, but gastrointestinal symptoms, working that up, because we think about it as a way of, that we're not treating their autism, but we're just trying to help them feel better. If you or I are going to work and we have GI distress, I'm not going to want to be at work, and so they might not want to be in their therapy. So if you can improve those symptoms, that can lead to better participation in their therapies, for example.
They tried secretin, but it didn't pan out because.
Yeah, secretin. So that got really a lot of attention in 1998, based on one report of. So what secretin is a hormone, and so what one gastroenterologist was studying in a youngster with autism, who's actually just doing a workup and administered secretin, and then reported, wow, there's been a remarkable change in this kiddo. And I remember this specifically because I was back at New England Medical Center, and then that story got released on Dateline. The next morning I showed up at work and I had like 70 messages on my email or my voicemail saying, hey, you guys are doing research in autism, can you hook us up with secretin? So since that time, there's been over 20, like it's kind of crazy how many trials there have been. There's over 20 clinical trials, well-designed, really scientifically designed studies to examine the effectiveness of secretin in treating autism, and none of them have panned out at all. Exactly, great point.
Okay, we've got a question from Good Sam, so let's take that one. And welcome Good Sam and Mary Bridge, who are joining us for the first time. Can you hear us? You're on. You might turn your mic on. That might, these newbies. There you go. Oh, that was it, huh? Yeah. All right, do you have a question? We hear you now, laughing.
Good, now you can hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, we were having problems on our end, sorry about that.
No worries, we hear you.
My question is that I have a child with autism, and I also actually am not diagnosed yet, but I know that I have autism, and I'm wondering if there's any research in women and up in Seattle at all for, or adults in general.
Yeah, it's a great question. So right now, the National Institute of Health has said we need to understand what's going on with autism in girls and women. Right now, the autism is diagnosed about 4 times as often in boys as it is in girls. And there's a lot of questions out there that the National Institute of Health is saying we need to answer this question. Are we talking, is it strictly a genetic thing going on? Are we talking actually is it societal, we're actually missing it in girls? Is there something else going on there? So there is actually a project right now that's funded by NIH. That's a multi-site project between us here at Seattle Children's Hospital, Yale University, Harvard University, and UCLA, focused on understanding autism in girls. It's a large, like I said, multi-site project where we're focusing on imaging, electrophysiology, and genetics and behavior to really understand what's going on with autism in girls, because we don't know enough about it. There's still that big question. We know, actually, that there's a genetic contributor, a clear one, in 45% of all girls with autism. It's almost half, which I always sort of think is pretty exciting in terms of when I first got involved in understanding the causes of autism. We said, well, we know it causes autism about 5% of cases. We're up to almost half with girls with autism, which is very exciting for me. We still got a long way to go, but I'm excited that we're making a lot of headway. So we need to answer that question. That study is ongoing now. As far as studies for adults with autism, there is one study I know of that's starting up this summer, funded by NIMH, focused on adults with autism, and it's really specifically looking at neurological functioning, and so it's an imaging study for adults. Those are the 2 studies I would highlight right now, and I'm wondering what a good way to provide information about how families could contact us about that.
Do you have any?
So this is Gary Stobie again. So I'll just comment on with regards to just adults with looking for diagnosis of autism. So it's a difficult area. Actually, our adult autism clinic at University of Washington that opened up in 2012. About 20 to 25% of our new patient evaluations are actually individuals looking for a diagnosis. And most of these individuals are what would be considered high functioning. And the process of our diagnosis, and this is one of the highlights actually, the points you guys were making about the importance of us developing biomarkers. The way that we currently do a diagnosis is we take a history, a developmental history, and we make observations of the behaviors that we see in an individual. And individuals that are high functioning, because they've made such progress, when we look at them at that moment in time, it's really hard to measure their autism. And the developmental history is unreliable often because we don't have a parent, or it's hard to remember some of the details of the early developmental history. So we've had a challenge, and a number of individuals that we see, we really can't make a diagnosis on. So it really does emphasize the need to develop these biomarkers. But you can go to the website, University of Washington Adult Autism Clinic, and get directions there for how to get a referral if somebody does need that.
Perfect. Great.
Thank you.
So, should we move to the question in here? Yeah.
Hi, my son is 2 years old and he was just recently diagnosed, so this whole world is very new to me. I'm sorry, I don't want to get emotional. And my question is, we're doing 25 hours of ABA therapy, and as long as we keep him engaged, he's with us. But the moment we let him play by himself, he's gone again, for lack of a better word. So my husband and I are obsessed, and we've never left him to play alone. We try to keep him. We try to keep him engaged all day. My question is that the right thing?
Good question. It's a great question, and it's totally okay. She's sad. So I would say one quick thing, and then maybe Dave, looks like you were going to say something. But we've been working on a video. This is how I'm going to answer this question first. We have a video that's coming out next month that we've worked on with funds from the Attorney General's office. And it's called Understanding Autism. It's voices and insight from parents and professionals. And the whole purpose of this video is actually to be able to sort of pass along to families like you who've just gotten a diagnosis. And it's really a lot of wonderful, wonderful insight from parents who have kind of been along the journey and have asked the exact same question you're asking right now. And the reason I like that so much is that because it's coming from other parents who have kind of lived it as opposed to professionals, which I think is really great. So I want to get that to you. That's the first thing I'm going to say. So I can figure out how to do that. The second thing I guess I want to say, just about sort of intervention, what kind of science says about that, is right now we don't know what the best sort of dosage for behavioral therapy is right now. We don't know. And we don't know kind of, we know that it seems to be effective for most kids, for many kids with autism. And that's what we know. And we need to really move that ahead a lot. So it's not like we could say, yes, for sure, you want to sort of keep on cranking those hours, and that's what's going to be important. You're going to sort of get there. Because unfortunately, science doesn't know. But what we do know is that when parents are engaged or involved, we know that outcomes are a lot better for kiddos. When parents are the folks that are sort of being there and administering the treatments and involved and engaged in therapy, that's 100% super important. So I guess the way I would say it, I'm going to defer to some other folks here in the room as well, is that by staying engaged is really going to be what's going to be a key. You staying engaged, you parents staying engaged is what's going to be really most helpful in the outcome. With the notion that you still need to take care of yourself too. I mean, that's kind of a key piece of that. If you get fried out, that's not really helping anyone. And so you need to take care of yourself as well.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on that, and one of the things that we do over at the Autism Centers, we have classes, and a message that we try to communicate is do what you can. And you don't have to do everything. You don't have to be the ABA therapist and the mom. Do what's going to work for you, what's going to work for your family, and you're obviously doing a great job. So keep it up. So nice job. Do you have something to say, Kat? Tell us who you are.
Hey, this is Katrina. I have a son who's 15. And mom to mom, let yourself off the hook a little bit. Be the mom, enjoy him.
Any other advice from people in the room?
She has not taken the support group that she's involved with, so talk to her.
Sorry. Right. No, good. Other questions? We might have time for one more question. Go ahead.
You were talking about the earlier study, and you showed the pictures of those two kids. The what was that gene called?
CHD8.
My son looks just like that little boy. Is there information that I can just look at?
Sure, yeah. for
Okay.
sure.
My daughter just got diagnosed with autism too. She's 18. She also looks just like those kids. So it was kind of hard for me to look at those pictures and not like start crying because those kids look like mine. And so I'm just wondering, I would like more info.
Yeah, sure. Well, so broadly, I can say for more info, what's sort of a good way to do it? As far as CHD, that's just one particular genetic event, and we've identified already 200 that we're really confident about. We know, and our estimates are somewhere. Well, our estimate is 822 is our actual estimate, but the other folks have said it's close to 1,000, but we're sticking at 822 specific gene. So with CHD, that's just one of those, and there's many more we need to show. But if there's questions specifically about CHD, there's actually a website, ch8.org, that we started, which is really all about CHD8. It is the single most common genetic event that seems to be strictly tied to autism specifically. The only genetic event that's more common is FMR1, Fragile X, but we know that individuals who have Fragile X they can also develop intellectual disability, not just autism. So it is the most common, but it's also still very rare. At any rate, the short answer to the question is ch8.org, and there's some information about that. Sure.
All right. I think that
Great.
might be it. Thanks for everybody for being here. We'll see you in 2016. Cheers.
Cheers.
Nice job.
From Mancini.